and welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 502, and today's date is October 25th, 2014, and the title of this episode is a Current Economic Collapse News Brief for this Saturday. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, Obamacare is completely falling apart. We realize that premiums are going up. Of course, Obama doesn't want anyone to see the premiums until after the elections. They're using things like there's a glitch and we don't know why it's not showing premiums, but the real reason is because the premiums are going to be going up a lot more. But what we're seeing now, and as we know, 30,000 Walmart employees are going to be losing their health insurance, but they're not alone. 13 states and the District of Columbia are canceling plans that are not in compliance with Obamacare. Virginia will be the hardest hit, with about 250,000 families losing their health insurance. Of course, all of these plans being canceled now weren't in compliance a year ago, but back then, what did President Obama do? Well, he asked that they be granted a reprieve from the enforcement. That is now coming to an end. As a result, hundreds of thousands more people will lose their health insurance. And according to the top executive of H&R Block, the nation's largest tax preparer, Obamacare will add significant complexity to next year's tax season. CEO William Cobb warned, depending on their situation, there are instances where filers may need to file multiple new tax forms and complete additional worksheets. Beginning January, anyone who does not have health insurance that meets the Obamacare requirements will be subject to penalties. As we know, there's penalties, taxes, and everything else intertwined into the health insurance, and of course, this is not a benefit for the people. If you look what's happening here, how could this possibly be a benefit for the people when you add penalties, taxes, you're losing your health insurance, you're losing your doctor? There's nothing that's benefiting the people whatsoever. People who receive a subsidy for health insurance could be in for a shock if calculations show they received a larger subsidy than they were entitled to. Well, guess what? They're going to have to repay the federal government for any overage they got, and this is going to cause a complete nightmare for many, many people. And we can see Obamacare is not a benefit for the people whatsoever. It is a disaster for the people. And this is why the government officials decided to completely exempt themselves from receiving Obamacare. They decided to stay with their own health insurance, and they didn't go ahead and take it. And of course, as our leaders, they did not lead by action. They led by, listen, this is good enough for the people. We don't want it because we know it's intertwined with penalties, taxes, and it's really not beneficial for us because there's no benefits involved in this, and this is why they didn't take it whatsoever. Now, in a previous report, I mentioned that Ohio, I think this might have been yesterday, the day before, that they were doing a no-refusal blood draw, checking for those people who are intoxicated, and if you refused a breathalyzer test, they would be allowed to take blood from you as long as they got a warrant, and they were already set up to do this. But what's very interesting about this entire thing is that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has been offering grants and toolkits to state and local government agencies in an effort to encourage them to begin conducting these no-refusal weekend checkpoints, which is very interesting, where they're collecting your blood, your DNA, and all the information to be fed into their databases. And you could see this is starting at a federal level, which actually, when you look at it, works in accordance with the real ID that DHS is doing right now. And we can see that DHS has been infiltrating all the local law enforcement by giving them grants and gifts and money and technology, machine guns, armored vehicles, and we can see the same things happening right now. They're giving them grants and saying, yes, do this, you'll receive more money. And it looks like they're in the process of getting people used to the idea that, yes, if you're stopped and you refuse a breathalyzer test, they could just take your blood and they can detain you even though you are not driving intoxicated, you don't show any signs of it whatsoever. And it seems like they're trying to kind of brainwash everyone and get us convinced that this is okay. It's not in violation of any of your rights whatsoever, and it seems like they're really pushing this hard. Okay, now as we can see, New York and New Jersey were like kind of in lockdown where they had a couple of Ebola patients, and the doctor that was coming from Liberia came up here. They went through the enhanced screening and they found absolutely nothing, and he was allowed to roam around New York. And of course, how good is the enhanced screening if they couldn't find anything? Actually, not that good. And the whole thing is, they knew that he was coming from an area where there was Ebola. He was treating Ebola patients, and they didn't have the common sense to say, you know what, let's keep him for a little while and check him out to make sure. But from all of this and everything that's going on, we see very strange things. Of course, the CDC, all the protocols that they have completely make no sense whatsoever. They've been dealing this for about a year in West Africa, and they can't figure out that Ebola is contagious. But the other thing is that Obama, of course, everyone realizes this, he creates a strike team to come in after the fact, almost like the police force or the SWAT team. They're not going to protect you from getting Ebola. What they do is they come in afterwards and they clean up the situation. So how does this prevent anything from going on here? It doesn't. And again, what happens this winter when we have a lot of flu victims who have temperature? You're going to see military task forces show up on everyone's doorstep because they might have Ebola. What they're doing right now makes no sense. Now, we have to look at the agendas. What are they actually doing here? It seems like the CDC seems like they're taking their direction from the Obama administration. This is why things seems very, very confused, and they're not telling people to cover up, to take precautions. Of course, now they are because of the public outcry, but before they couldn't think of it on their own, but it looked like they were confused in what they were saying, and it looks like they were getting instructions from another area. And we can see this is most likely an agenda where they're pushing it very hard to convince everyone that Ebola is here in the United States. Now, one of the agendas is to vaccinate everyone and make it mandatory. And we can see right now the drug companies are trying to get their vaccines indemnified where they're not held responsible for whatever happens to you or whatever is inside of these vaccines. And it seems like the drug companies are pushing that right now, and they have to keep the fear up in America, because without the fear, you're not going to want to get the vaccine. So we can see how this agenda is being pushed really, really hard right now, and this strike team makes no sense whatsoever because it doesn't prevent anything. If he really wanted to prevent something, he would put a travel ban on the flights coming from West Africa. They would track those patients because you know where they're coming from, because you have their tickets, you know what flights they took before, because you have the database of their flight itinerary, and you can track, yes, they flew from West Africa up to Japan and then over to the United States. You can easily find this information out. But again, they're not doing this because they don't want to stop the flow of traffic to West Africa, because as we can see, Ebola is hitting only those countries where China and Russia are, and there is huge amount of natural resource discoveries. And of course in Liberia, as we know, that is open for bidding for companies to come in and extract their natural resources. And we can see troops are on the standby. They are ready. Outside of Liberia, some are already in there. UK has troops coming in there. And the real test of all this is when all this is all said and done and Ebola is contained, do those troops come out of these countries? And this is something we have to watch very carefully, because I'm going to say they're probably most likely going to be staying inside of this country. And again, we have to remember that remark of that UN ambassador to Liberia, where that ambassador was out there saying, listen, these troops are coming here not to overthrow the government of Liberia. And that is a very strange remark to say. And what would make the UN ambassador even think this or to say that? Now, NATO is still out there, and they are claiming that Russia still has troops on the border of Ukraine. They haven't withdrawn all their troops, and of course, Russia is allowed to keep troops wherever they want, especially on the border. The United States has troops on the border. And again, they show no proof to say, look how many troops there are. They just continually out there saying this, and NATO continues to claim continues their claims that Russia still has troops stationed in Ukraine. This is coming from General Philip Breedlove. According to Breedlove, some Russian troops are still deployed near Russia's border with Ukraine. The forces that are saying are showing no intention of leaving as of yet. And of course, they shouldn't have to leave. They're troops on Russian soil. It makes no sense. But of course, they're not doing this to make sense. They're doing it to push the war forward. And what's very interesting, Kerry is out there and he is saying that he is urging Moscow to fully implement a ceasefire agreement reached last month between Russia, Ukraine, and the pro-Russian forces. Now, Russia didn't reach anything. Putin put forth a ceasefire plan. It was like 12 points or so, and he presented to the pro-Russian side, and the pro-Russian side and Ukraine government talked to each other, and they decided, okay, let's have a ceasefire. But of course, they're leaving this on Russia right now, and they went on to say that the deal aimed at stopping fighting in the east of Ukraine includes monitoring and verification of a ceasefire by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe on both sides of the border. Putin blamed the Ukrainian government Friday for blocking implementation of the peace agreement. And again, the Ukrainian government, especially Yatsenyuk, who's a banker, does not want a ceasefire. They do not want this whatsoever, and they're going to do everything they possibly can not to abide by any of this whatsoever. And we can see already they are building the troops up. They're getting more military assets in. They're building the wall, which will separate Ukraine and Russia, and they are getting prepared for something to happen. Already Yatsenyuk was out there saying they are planning on terrorist attacks during the election, and of course 3 million of those people are not going to be voting in the election. Now it looks like the Washington Post is basically going on that propaganda of chemical weapons used by the Islamic State, and they're trying to merge that with Assad. The Post editorial titled, "Obama Gives Syria's Assad Another Pass on Chemical Weapons," seizes on the recent reports for use of chlorine weapons by the Islamic State to press for the overthrow of the Assad regime in Syria. The paper states quite bluntly that the Assad regime is once again blatantly violating the red line drawn by Mr. Obama against the use of chemical weapons. So what they're trying to do right now is they're trying to make the case that the Islamic State and Assad are working together. They have the chlorine weapons. They're being used in this area, and they're trying to link in any way they possibly can, but they really can't do it because it really makes no sense at this point, and they're still out there doing this. They're trying to find some link somehow, some way, so they can go in and remove Assad. And of course, they're putting everything into place right now, and that shows me that they're getting ready for some major event, just like the Islamic State has warned the journalists that they're going to be kidnapped if they anywhere in the world, and especially if they come to Iraq and Syria. And to me, it seems like they're trying to make the journalists very nervous about going into this area, because it seems like the United States, UK, Israel, the other Arab nations are planning something very big, because we already see the troop buildups in Iraq. They kicked out the Iraqi forces from an air base. The United States have taken it over. They're setting up a division headquarters that can support 30,000 soldiers. We have word that 13,000 soldiers are headed towards Iraq, and we can see already they are training the Free Syrian Army rebels to be on defense only, and this way they can bring in U.S. forces to help them in the area inside of Syria, and we can see exactly what they're trying to do. And of course, they're still trying to convince everyone they need a no-fly zone, even though Syria kind of did a little bit, check to the United States saying, listen, we destroyed those planes, so there's no reason for a no-fly zone, because now the Islamic State has no air force whatsoever. Now, with this whole Ebola crisis, what's very interesting, it seems like there's a lot of propaganda coming out there now, and it says that the Ebola crisis rekindles concerns about secret research in Russian military labs. And it seems like now they're trying to link Ebola to Russia. They're doing everything they possibly can to demonize Russia, make Russia responsible for Ebola. The question is, what would be the purpose of Russia doing this whatsoever? None. But what they kind of left out is that, oh yeah, while they were testing in Sierra Leone at Kenema, they were doing experiments looking for a vaccine in Sierra Leone. And of course, as we know, the US AMRID and Tulane University carried out research that is illegal in the US. They didn't mention that in the report. They also didn't mention that the facility received about $140 million paid by the U.S. Department of Defense. They also didn't report that the government of Sierra Leone has concluded that the current Ebola outbreak centered on that lab at Kenema and has since ordered it closed. They also didn't report that a Liberian doctor said all those people that were getting some type of treatment for Ebola, those are the people that came down with Ebola, and they're not reporting that. But they seem to be demonizing Russia, and this reminds me of everything else they do. They're just trying to bring in Russia, mention it, and they're trying to convince everyone that this is where we should be looking at this time and not at anything else that was going on. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.